We now begin 11.2, the second section of Chapter 11, the conflicts over land, dealing with the Native American issues. So this is our main question, and so here are two essential questions. What were the causes for the movement of Native Americans west of the Mississippi River from their homelands east of it? And then how do different tribes react differently to that situation? So in this presentation, we're going to be going over the 11.2 guided reading worksheet answers, so you should have that out with you. So let us begin. So the first question, to fill in the blank, is the answer is Indian Removal Act. So after Congress passes the Indian Removal Act, Jackson sent federal officials in to negotiate treaties with Native Americans in the Southeast. So what I'd like you to do is I did share out a 11.2 note guide, and I'll be jumping back and forth between this worksheet and then some notes to add in. So the first one, let's just go through some basics about the Indian Removal Act. It's passed in 1830. Obviously, it's the removal of Indians, but what it did say is it gave the government of the United States the right to pay Indians to move them from their homelands to quote-unquote Indian territory. And the groups that are affected are basically the Indians of the Southeast. So you're talking about the Cherokee, you're talking about the Seminole, you're also talking about ones from the Midwest, Indian tribes we discussed before, the Miami, the Shawnee, but even tribes from this area as well. The biggest group affected is this group known as the 5 civilized tribes. So you should write these down, okay? And I just want to say a little bit about each one. The Cherokee is probably the most well-known. They were the ones involved in the Trail of Tears. Some people know them simply because of the Cherokee name of the SUV. The Creek we've discussed before. They're Indians of northern Alabama that were involved in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. The idea of the Seminole were Indians of Florida. They're still there today, some of them. Chickasaw and the Choctaw are of northern Alabama and Mississippi. So let's go into this question. What makes them civilized? So as we look at this question, the tribes were surprised that the government wanted to relocate them because they were considered quote-unquote civilized. And what made them civilized was they had adopted white ways. Things like farming. They had begun to stop their migratory movement and basically settle down into basically what white Europeans and Americans were doing mostly, which was farming. Also, the way that they tried to assimilate and fit in was change their clothing. They started dressing like their neighbors, not so much like their traditional ways. And last but not least was they actually began owning slaves. So those successful Indians that were able to did purchase slaves that allowed for their agricultural cultivation to increase. The idea they could basically have larger farms. All this was hoping to fit in with their white neighbors. So the next one, in 1834, Congress creates the Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. So let's take a look at a map. So as you can sort of see, we mentioned those 5 tribes that are right here and down here. And you can sort of see that there are also numerous other tribes listed throughout here. Yes, Iowa is a state, but it's also a tribe. Omaha is a city, but it's also a tribe. So you can see a bunch of them, and then you can also see where these locations of where they wanted them to resettle. So this would be the Indian Territory that they want to relocate these natives that are east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi. So moving on, President Jackson supported Georgia's efforts to remove, as we just mentioned, the Cherokee, even after Chief Justice John Marshall had ruled against Georgia. Georgia wanted to do it. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court said no. So again, let's jump to some notes here. This is the actual name of the court case, Worcester versus Georgia, and in it, the court actually ruled in favor of the Cherokees and against the state of Georgia. So this was the Chief Justice, the same guy that we had mentioned way back at John Adams. He's the one who appointed him before 1800, and he is still sitting on the bench. So he's been there for 30 plus years. And Chief Justice, basically, Marshall rules that the Cherokees that's their land, and they are entitled to stay there. And Georgia cannot forcibly remove them. But as we know, Jackson is in favor of this legislation. And so here is a strange comment that he supposedly said when he heard of the court's decision. Marshall, meaning John Marshall, has made his decision, his ruling, now let him enforce it. Now why this is so aggravating is that the President of the United States, that is their job, is to enforce rulings of the court. Doesn't matter if he agrees with it or not, that's the way our government system is supposed to work. That is what's supposed to happen in checks and balances. So getting back to this, we'll go on further and talk about Jackson and what he does to basically move the 17,000 Cherokee that did not go quickly and leave their land. So the number 6 one is General Winfield Scott and an army of 7,000 troops go into Georgia and forcibly remove the Cherokee from their land. So here is a picture of General Winfield Scott and the number of troops that he's going to be leading, and that is what his job is going to be, to remove the Cherokee on what will become known as the Trail of Tears. So last but not least here, it is known as the Trail of Tears, so let's add that to our notes as well. So as we look at this picture, you can sort of see this would be an artist's rendering of what it would look like. They have all their belongings, and in here, interspersed, you can sort of see soldiers with them. And they are carrying everything. You have the young and you have the old, you have animals, all kinds of things, and they are going over 800 to 1,000 miles away from where they had lived for generations and generations. So this becomes the Trail of Tears. Okay, so let's get some basics down here. And the Trail of Tears begins over a several year period. So it's not 1 year, it's not 2, but it's stretched over a certain number of years because they do not move the Cherokee all at one time. You're not going to move 17,000. It's just not able to be done. And so they're going to move them from Georgia to present-day Oklahoma. Okay, most of them are coming from that area, but you'll also see some coming from North Carolina as well. And those numbers, again, are around 17,000 Cherokees are being moved with the help of 7,000 troops led by Winfield Scott. Now, the results that make it the Trail of Tears is the death of almost 1/4. Nearly 4,000 Cherokee die. The people who die most are the young. The young are not yet strong enough to basically fight against some of the illnesses. The weather also contributed to it. Nutrition contributed to it. And also the old died as well because they were too weak. And so the travel and the conditions and everything else led to many of them dying and having to be buried along the roadside. Sadly, the Cherokee, even though from the area of Georgia and parts of Carolinas, their actual headquarters is located in Oklahoma. And they call it the Trail Where They Cried. It's a little bit of a change of the Trail of Tears. But if you're in that area, they are now marking certain areas of the states and roads where they believe the Trail of Tears actually crossed through. So, we'll take a look here. Again, these are all movements here of Indians out of this area of the southeast. So various numerous tribes, you can sort of see that throughout the map. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop and I'm going to share a video with you, and hopefully it is able to be seen by you.
The promises of the United States government were that if the Cherokees, the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Seminoles, the Chickasaws could somehow assimilate ways of living that were more like their white neighbors, that they could be political and social equal.
Political and social equal.
Literally, Thomas Jefferson once assured
in a speech
the
Indian leaders
become
in a
the
speech
equal of
that
white.
he believed they could become the equal of
You
white
will
people.
unite yourselves with us, President Jefferson said.
You will unite
Join our
yourselves
great
with
council
us,
and form
President
one people
Jefferson
with us.
said.
And
Join
we
our
shall
great
all be
councils and form
Americans.
one people with us, and we shall all be Americans.
But the end of the 1820s saw the first stirring of a
But the
populist
end of the
political
1820s
that
saw
sent
the
tremors
first
through
stirring
Indian
of a
lands all
populist
over the
political
East.
movement that sent tremors through Indian lands
This
all over the
hard-edged
East.
new movement found voice in Andrew Jackson.
This hard-edged new movement found
In
voice
his
in
first
Andrew
address
Jackson.
to Congress, President Jackson
In
announced
his
his
first address
intention
to
to do
Congress,
as his voters
President
pleased,
Jackson announced his
which is to
intention
say
to
rid
do
the
as his
East of the
voters
Indian
pleased,
tribes once and for all.
which is to say rid the
The
East of the
Indian
Indian
removal
tribes
bill
once and for all.
Was Jackson's
The
first
Indian
priority
removal bill
once he was in
was Jackson's
office.
first priority
It
once
did
he was in
reflect a
office.
fundamental
It did
shift
reflect a
in the way
fundamental
that America
shift
was beginning to define
in the way
itself.
that America
The
was
thinking of
beginning
the
to
day
define
becomes more
itself.
racist. That
The thinking of the day
Cherokees
becomes
are
more racist.
inferior
That
and
the
cannot
Cherokees are
like the whites.
inferior and cannot be
The legislation
like the
passed,
whites.
and President Andrew Jackson's
legislation
signature
passed.
made Indian removal
And
the law of
President
the
Andrew
land.
Jackson's signature made Indian removal the law of the land.
The people are told they have 2 years to
The
remove
people are
themselves
told they
peacefully,
have 2 years
with
to
support
remove
from the
themselves
federal government,
peacefully.
supplying and make
With
sure that
support
they get
from the
their
federal
payments.
government, supplying and make sure that they get their payments.
And only a handful of people leave.
And
They
only a
continue
handful of
planting
people
their
leave.
fields and making improvements on their farms.
They continue
That
planting
was
their
their land.
fields
They
and
weren't
making
gonna leave.
improvements on their farms. That was their land. They weren't going to leave.
For the vast majority of the Cherokee people,
For the
removal was not
vast
an
majority of
option.
the Cherokee people,
It just was not.
removal was not an option.
They couldn't
was not.
comprehend removal. They couldn't
They
comprehend,
couldn't comprehend
that
removal.
a handful of
They
people
couldn't
signing a piece of
comprehend
paper
that a
would be
handful of
enough to
people
remove
signing
them
a
from
piece
their
of paper
homelands.
would be enough to remove them from their homelands.
On the morning of May 26, 1838,
On the
3
morning of
days
May
after the
26,
removal deadline,
1838,
federal
3
troops
days
and state
after the
militia
removal
began
deadline,
what they called the assembly
federal troops
of the
and
Cherokee
state
people.
militia began what they called the Assembly of the Cherokee people.
Everything that wasn't actually on the person
Everything
belonged to
that
the
wasn't
state.
actually on the person now belonged to the state.
And they were forced out into yards and on to
And
the
they were
roads
forced out into
with
their
whatever they
yards
had on their back.
and on to the roads with whatever they had on their back.
It was early December before the final group began the
It was
850
early
mile
December
trip.
before the final group began
By
the
then,
850
the long line
mile
of
trip.
Cherokee travelers stretched from
By
Illinois
then,
into
the long
Kentucky,
line of Cherokee travelers
unbroken in
stretched
places
from
for
Illinois
3
into
miles.
Kentucky, unbroken in places for 3 miles.
No one could have predicted that one of the hardest
No one could have predicted that one of the hardest
strike that
winters
year.
in memory would strike that year.
a New Englander passing through western Kentucky noted the sad
A New
procession.
Englander passing through western Kentucky
2,000
noted
people,
the sad procession.
sick and feeble, many near death.
2,000 people.
One woman
sick
was
and
carrying
feeble,
her
many near
youngest
death.
child who was dying in her arms.
One woman was carrying her youngest child who was
The
dying in
Indians
her
buried
arms.
14 or 15 at every
The
stopping place.
Indians buried 14 or 15 at every stopping place.
The United States gained
The United States gained a lot of land,
a loss for the American government.
but a loss
Is
for the American
The
government
blemish, the stain
is the
it
blemish,
places upon our
the
national
stain
honor.
it places upon our national
What we
honor.
did in the 1830s to
What we did
the
in
Southeastern
the
Indians,
1830s to
it's ethnic
the
cleansing.
Southeastern Indians, it's ethnic cleansing.